Good afternoon, Rogério, and everyone who's listening to us. I salute you all and thank you for your presence. I would like to thank everyone, the technicians from ANA, our team from Usace that has been here with us in this long partnership, and for sharing with you all experiences regarding dams and dikes. It is an aspect that we have been talking about for a long time. We need to face these issues with the dikes. We have a huge challenge with the dikes in Brazil, in addition to the dams. And things have been intensified now with the events in Rio Grande do Sul. And this seminar today will be bringing light into, it will be casting a light into several of these aspects that are so important for Brazil. I'll give the floor back to you, Rogério, so we can continue the event. Thank you very much, Bruno. And now, good afternoon to everyone. I would like to thank you all for your participation. We have a few friends who are still getting here. We have about 180 people in the room. And I would like to thank everyone from Usace for their availability, the speakers today, and the team that is together with them. Our Usace's partnership has been happening since 2021. And this is the 9th workshop that we've had. Also had a course this year in April. And we still intend to create several workshops this year in order to transfer knowledge, which is something that's very important for us with this team from the USA. First, now I would like to introduce our speakers. I'll create like a quick reading of their resumes. The one about Beck and Ryan. Beck and Ryan, I think, yeah. And Ryan will talk about the database for dikes in the USA. So Becky Ragan, she's a manager of the National Dam Inventory of the USA for the Military Corps. She has over 25 years experience in the Engineer Corps, and she's responsible for planning, execution of the National Inventory for dams. She also manages the inventory of over 700 dams and the performance indicators of Usace's performance program. And she's also very involved in the church, which she's a part of, and the Scout program in America. Brian van Bokkern, sorry if my pronunciation is not correct. Brian is currently the manager of the National Program of Dikes for Usace. And he also leads a team of data scientists, programmers, and IT professionals that deal with several different IT systems and information systems for the dikes, for the American Army. And before working for Usace, he worked in the National Space Intelligence and the Command for Naval Intelligence, being responsible for several types of military structures, manned or unmanned. And Brian is also a postgraduate, has postgraduate degrees in geography, climate, meteorology, science, and space management, geospatial management. I would like once again to thank them for their availability. And I would like to give the floor to Becky so she can start her presentation.
Okay, yes. Fantastic. Thank you. Good. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about the U.S. National Inventory of Dams and some of the newer components that we have added to the inventory. So in the next 30 minutes or so, I will be talking about the National Inventory of Dams for the United States, what that looks like. We have multiple map viewers in there, so we'll be describing what those look like. why the Corps of Engineers is publicly sharing our inundation maps, our flood maps. Then I have some slides that we either show through the website or we'll actually go live, and then we'll open that up for questions and discussions. And just let me know if I need to slow down or pause as well. So to give you an overview of the U.S. National Inventory of Dams, we call it the NID. It is a congressionally authorized database which documents dams in the United States and then our territories. So the database includes dams that are owned and operated by the federal agencies, our military, the 50 states, some Native American tribes, local government, public utilities, and private entities. So the information about these dams, we include where the dam is located, its size, therefore its height, the storage, the purpose of the reservoir, the materials that the dams are made of, when was it last inspected, and other regulatory facts about whether a state regulates the dam, a federal agency regulates the dam, who's inspecting that dam. And this information is provided by all 50 states, Puerto Rico, and 18 federal dam safety agencies. So it is maintained and published by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, but most of the information is gathered from other agencies that are actually regulating and inspecting most of the dams in the United States. On this chart, you can actually see 3 other charts. We were just trying to describe our dams by owner type. As you can see, most of those dams are actually owned by the private entities. So over 60% of the dams in the U.S. are privately owned. Less than 5% of the dams in the U.S. are actually owned by the federal government. If you can see by the height chart, most of the dams in the inventory are considered small by international definitions. And then most of them are also low hazard potential. Low hazard potential means that if that dam should fail or misoperate, there is no potential life loss and the damages are constrained and limited to the owner. The high hazard potential dams are dams where there is potential loss of life, and then significant economic consequences. Significant, there is no potential loss of life, but significant damages. So currently, the database includes 91,856 dams, but you can see from these bar charts that over half of those dams are considered smaller in size. To give you an overview of the website, we did relaunch a new modern looking website in late 2021. We have a much more user-friendly search function. We have a learning center for additional dam-related resources. For the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers dams, we have additional information to explain the benefits of those dams, as well as the risks associated with those dams, which I will talk a little bit about later in the presentation. Another new functionality that we added with this new version is the real-time data input and download. Prior to that, the NID was updated periodically, about once a year. There would be a data call, and we would post the database, and it would stay up there for about a year, and then we would start that process over again. But now the agencies are actually able to go in and get that information and update that as they go. Another new component of the National Inventory of Dams, which we will be talking about in more detail, is the Corps of Engineers is publicly sharing our dam flood inundation maps. We also have maps in there from the state of California. And so I'll get into those details about why we're sharing that information and what that looks like in a little bit. I just wanted to highlight, we mentioned that we have additional resources. We have fact sheets and videos, as well as animations explaining how dams operate in a routine fashion. So when there is water behind the dam and we need to release it, we show how that actually works and potentially could flood people downstream. We have videos explaining what the flood inundation maps are, as well as fact sheets on the inventory and flood inundation maps. Two of our static fact sheets are also available in Spanish. So before we start talking about information that the Corps of Engineers is sharing, I just wanted you to know about our inventory. On this map, the blue dots represent all dams in the U.S., and the yellow dots represent the 750 dams owned and operated by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. You can see from the charts on the right side that our inventory looks much different than the national inventory, in that most of our dams are taller and high hazard potential. We have two different map viewers within the National Inventory of Dams website. This example is the project map viewer. In this example, we are showing a dam in its inundation map area. So you can see in the purple there, that is the area that would be potentially flooded. And then we also are sharing the consequences associated with that particular scenario. You can see on the left side, consequence estimate, and a row is highlighted. So there is what we are showing with the pool elevation would be estimated at that scenario, how many people are at risk during the day, at night, buildings at risk, and then off the screen is the total economic cost. We have descriptions to explain what these different scenarios mean, and we actually have both breach and non-breach. One additional detail about the definitions is that we try to write them using plain language and not trying to use engineering speak. So we're trying to make sure that the general public can understand what these different scenarios are so they can help be prepared. We also have a second viewer available. It's called the Advanced Map Viewer. This is an example of a different Corps of Engineers dam, excuse me, in the Advanced Map Viewer. The Advanced Map Viewer is intended for more technical users, as you can turn on much more information, such as hospitals, airports, colleges, schools, medical facilities. You can add your own data and overlay it on here, share it with others, and as well as download this information into your own geographic information system. So why are we sharing this information? The Corps of Engineers believes that the public needs to understand the risk from our dams. We are trying to empower the public to prepare for any potential flooding and to manage their own risk. From these maps, it's very easy for emergency managers and the people that live down or upstream of the dam to visually see how that flooding could impact them. There is a legend that shows the different depths at that point, so you can zoom in and see. But it really is just trying to put all this information that we have and we know about our dams into the public and the people that would be directly affected by potential flooding. So currently in the National Inventory of Dams, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has about 85% of our high hazard potential dam maps in the NID. There are about 8 to 10 scenarios per dam, and that does include breach and non-breach scenarios. I will note for our low and most of our significant hazard potential dams, there is no potential loss of life. So we have a statement in there trying to explain to the public why there are no maps being produced and shown in the NID, because there is no potential loss of life. And most of the flooding would stay within the riverbanks. So to go along with the maps, each of our core districts have written project descriptions, risk characterization summaries, and risk management measures for their highest risk dams. So these narratives help explain what is going on at those dams. It helps explain what they're seeing in the maps, what we're concerned about at that particular dam, and then what we're doing to mitigate those risks and to potentially correct any deficiencies or problems at that particular dam. And as with the scenario definition, these narratives are written as a public-facing document, again, trying to use plain language and make it understandable to the public with very little engineering speak. As I mentioned earlier, the state of California has also provided inundation maps for inclusion in the National Inventory of Dams. We currently have more than 800 scenarios for almost 600 dams in California. These were provided by the state of California's Division of Safety of Dams. California provided the information to the NID team. We verified that the dam was in fact included in the inventory. The data was then imported into the map viewer. And then I will be showing you some examples of what all of these maps look like in a few minutes. We would like to be working with additional states, and there has been interest in some other states and other federal agencies to add their inundation maps into this platform. So I think I'll just stick to some slides instead of actually going into the site. If there's questions later on, I can pull up the site and go in. But for now, I'll just show you what it looks like with the web address. This is a publicly open, publicly accessible website. We have a geography menu on the left that allows you to drill down into particular states and then go into the county level. And we always have a summary bar totaling up the number of dams with emergency action plan, who regulates them. So that always stays the same no matter what geography level you're at. So this is an example of a Corps of Engineers dam. We do have more information on the Corps dams than we do other dams. We are sharing information on our risk assessment. You'll see that in the bottom left. And that is what we were doing in those narratives that I spoke of earlier. We are trying to explain to the public what it means this dam to have a moderate risk within our program. Here's an example of a project description. It describes when the project was built, the area that it is protecting, the areas that have potential flooding, the purpose of it. So it's really the benefits of this particular dam and why it was built. Here's an example of that risk characterization summary. So this is a narrative explaining why the Corps of Engineers is rating this as a moderate risk within our portfolio. Tries to describe to the public what is happening at that dam and what our concerns are at that particular dam. Below the summary is the risk management measures, which talk about what we are doing at that dam in regard to what we are concerned about. Talks about inspecting the dam, monitoring the dam, and any other resources the public should be aware of. As was shown earlier, this is the project map viewer within the NID for this dam. And you can see on the right
Quando vocês
side,
podem ver, esse é o mapa do NAD para essa barragem, e com os níveis diferentes de inundação e quais são os dados das consequências.
As users turn on a specific scenario, the consequence data is highlighted.
Conforme eles ligam um cenário específico, eles podem ver os dados e entender quantas pessoas estão em risco e quais seriam os custos econômicos associados àquele cenário em específico.
This is another example of the advanced map viewer showing the option of downloading this information. Emergency managers have responded very positive. They like the option to be able to download the information into their own systems for planning purposes. This is an example of an inundation map for one of the California dams. For California, there are not as many scenarios as the Corps dam. This example is showing a sunny day breach. You will also notice there is no consequence data associated with the California dams. The same information is available within the advanced map viewer, where you can turn on different layers such as fire stations, hospitals, and again, showing you the legend for that potential inundation and their depth. Another example from California are we have some maps where we do not have the actual depth grids. So we're just showing the inundation extent, and that is just shown in orange. So that is the presentation that I had. I can answer any questions now, or if we wanted to do Brian's and then answer questions.
Acho que podíamos, Beck, que tal fazer logo então a apresentação do Brian?
I think maybe we could already see Brian's presentation and then we put all questions together. Surely we will have similar questions for you both. Is that okay for you?
Então vamos, Brian, por favor. Obrigado. Boa tarde.
So please, Brian, please, good afternoon for you.
Yeah, good afternoon. Brian Van Bakeren again. I manage the National Levee Database for the Army Corps of Engineers. And I'll provide a simple overview of the actual system itself and what kind of data is contained in the system. And then some of our recently deployed enhancements to the website and database itself. So a little background about the National Levee Database. Congressionally authorized and public since 2011. And the genesis of the application arose out of the levee failures of Hurricane Katrina in the New Orleans metro area, which many folks are aware of. A lot of information was not known about some of those levees around New Orleans, so Congress authorized the creation of a database so that the information could be compiled and made publicly available so that the public understood the risks associated with levees in and around the nation. The Corps maintains this system, and most of the data in the database is non-federal. It comes from state and locals. So we publish data in partnership with all those entities outside the federal government. A little more background on the National Levee Database. It's a fairly complex tool containing lots of information that we portray to the public, but behind the system logins, and it contains a lot more detailed information. And thing to understand on the NLD is we have an integrated inspection system bolted onto the database. And separate from that, we have a risk assessment tool. We call it the levee screening tool that we conduct risk assessments on and then push that information into the levee database for public use. Our focus on the database is data quality and freshness. We spend probably 75 to 80% of our time on maintaining data freshness and quality. So we try to reduce our system costs and focus most of our efforts and money on improving data quality in the system overall. And lastly, we kind of co-manage the system with our Federal Emergency Management Agency. They are, I call them a co-sponsor. All the information managed in the database, they help out and assist us. And they do it because they manage the National Flood Insurance Program for the United States. And this levee information directly informs the flood insurance program. So it's in their interest to have quality levee data. So they assist us in the database maintenance. So again, the NLD is our single nationwide repository. And we're trying to focus in on some of these key items moving forward. It's kind of our new strategic direction that we have adopted in the last couple of years, and trying to get the information out to folks on key levee safety issues. But there's a lot of interest in understanding the cost of maintaining a levee. So we're adding additional tools to understand operation and maintenance of levees and construction of levees. And then probably the most important part is that nation's flood risk exposure. We're trying to quantify the flood risk nationwide within leveed areas, but also outside of leveed areas. So it's part of a comprehensive national flood risk exposure program that we're undertaking with FEMA, and the NLD is just a component of that. So as I mentioned, the NLD has been around since 2011, but probably interested in where the data came from. In 2011-12 timeframe, it started with just the Corps of Engineers levees, which is a small subset of the overall national inventory. But that provided the genesis of the information populating the database. So as you can see from the pie chart, the Corps of Engineers program is roughly 25% of the inventory. But those are some of the highest consequence levies. So you can see that, you know, a lot more people and a lot more infrastructure are behind those levies versus the other remaining ones, which are generally more agriculture in nature and a little less populous behind them. But after we deployed this database in 2011, FEMA and our state and locals and other agencies helped contribute additional information, which helped populate the database moving forward. So the data model in the NLD is very, very large. It has roughly 20 spatial feature classes, tracking all sorts of information on the levee system itself, and probably on the order of 400 data fields to track various information. A lot of those fields are associated with some of these detailed items like relief wells or pump stations or pipes. But you know, the levee itself is a fairly compact data set when you talk about the levee alignment, the inundation area, flood walls and closures. But we do track some of the additional information associated with that. And as I mentioned before, it has an integrated inspection system, so you can retrieve all the inspection data on the structure. And we also have a flood fight data collection. So when we have a major flood event, you can track levee incidences within the database as a flood event occurs. So the NLD has gone through three major cycles of improvement and enhancement. Obviously, our deployment in 2011 was the first iteration, with some subsequent minor improvements in the mid-2010s. We conducted a major overhaul in 2018 to kind of the standard you see with the National Inventory dams, kind of using a similar user interface and look and feel there. But in 2024, roughly February this year, we deployed a brand new public-facing site. And that was a result of a 2-year effort of outreach to the public and levee stakeholders throughout the United States. We received feedback on the use of our site and the data, and that's kind of the genesis of why we redeployed and repackaged our public-facing information. So again, we've tried to streamline the information about levees for the public. A lot of them do not need to know the detailed engineering information that a technical user would require. So we've tried to make it as compact and as streamlined as possible. So as you come to the new landing page, the new home page, you'll see a whole different look and feel than you would have seen in 2023 or before. We tried to incorporate some new searching techniques and boxes. And then we also added a lot of educational materials on the front page to help educate our audiences about levees and flooding. Whereas before we just had basically you dive into the database, but now we've tried to put more of the information in context. Probably the biggest change is the actual project page. So this is an individual levee system, a hydraulically standalone system. And so the public is presented with this nice compact view of a system itself. On the left-hand panel, you know, some basics about the system, who's maintaining it, who's involved with emergency management, and then some particulars about length and height and construction. But probably the most important part is in the center panels, the two text fields describing the project and its performance and condition. And then describing the flooding hazard, understanding what are the contributors for the flood hazard, you know, rivers and dams, and then tracking historic loading of this levee. We do that in the database. On the right-hand side, the behind this levy, again, consequences is very important. We used to only track buildings, people, and property value, but as a result of the feedback we received, we've added the additional categories. So farmland became a big ticket item last year during our feedback sessions. We have significant millions of acres of agricultural land subject to inundation behind a levee. So we track that now on these databases. Endangered species and critical infrastructure were all added as key items to track levee by levee throughout the system. And lastly, we track tribal activities in the levee area. That's an effort to reach our tribal relations and populations out there. So if a levee occurs on tribal land or their lands are subject to inundation, we portray that information. As I mentioned, some of the new educational pages are available with lots of graphics and photos and descriptions about levees and flooding. Another big change is the ability for users outside the federal government to request data changes. So we have online forms and submittal venues where they can bring more current levee information and submit it to our database, and we can incorporate that as quickly as possible. So public users get that nice streamlined look and feel, compact view of levee information, but we do have the ability to log in and get a more in-depth, detailed look at the levee information. So listing 4 major roles, we use in the website currently. The public user, no accounts, they can just explore the website at will. But the 3 more detailed users, listed there, kind of get a deeper look into the information. And so we assign them accounts and let them come in and explore. And in some cases, you can update information directly if you have those roles assigned to you. So once logged into the system, it's kind of it looks very similar to the National Inventory Dams. These pages are relatively updated. It's a tab system, just like on dams, where you kind of work your way left to right and explore the information about the levee system itself. Main things here, obviously, to track are the individual features, and then the risk. When I say risk, that's the risk assessment results about the levee system. And then we have a full document management system available for this to store documents about the levee. So the database, housing thousands of levee systems, keeping it up to date and exploring missing information is a key purpose. So 2 years ago, we were authorized by our Congress to conduct levee review. And what that does is it gives us that one-time authority to look out for improving information outside the Corps of Engineers levees. And so we are working with state and local owners and operators to validate the data, improve the data. And in some cases, we're actually going state by state to try to discover missing levees. Currently, we're working with Arkansas and Iowa to conduct a statewide review to identify missing levees in the state. That's a direct result of some major flooding in the last 5 years where levees were breached or overtopped, and they were unaware that there were actual infrastructure out there. So we do have cases where levees are built, but they're not really reported to any national regulatory agencies or databases. So our levee review process kind of follows this 4-step endeavor to improve the information. We have some automated tools to help us refine the georeferenced information, but we do conduct on-site visits to all of these if the levy owner elects to participate. It's a voluntary program, but we are making good headway with a lot of active participants at the state and local level. So this review process will likely continue for many years to come, with so many thousands of systems to be handled. But we do have a process and funding in place to continually improve the information in our system outside the federal levies, which we know a lot about. Our federal levies, we have a tremendous amount of information from studies and inspections, but it's the non-federal levies that we have very little on. As I mentioned before, we have an integrated inspection system. It's a phone-based, tablet-based levy inspection system where you go out in the field and collect field information and photos and observations, push it up to the database into the cloud, and then lastly, you'll create a formal inspection report, which is loaded to the database and can be used. As I mentioned before, our risk assessment tool called the Levy Screening Tool. This has also been around for roughly 12 years and was just recently overhauled too. This has a push-pull relationship with the NLD, but it's where you go to conduct a detailed risk assessment on your levy, looking at performance modes and consequences. And it has the ability to do full 2D modeling using HEC-RAS. And this is an online tool that we've been using for the last 2 years since we deployed this new version. And we continue to see great benefits in using this, determining a new way to look at our levy consequences and breach models, and being a good companion product to the National Levy Database. So I can pause there and we can open up the floor for some questions.
Bom, vou agora.
Thank you, Brian, for your presentation together with Rebecca.
Vou agora ler aqui as perguntas.
So now I will read the questions that we have in our Q&A session. So I just would like you, if you put any question in the chat, please just transfer it to the Q&A button, because we are focusing everything there. Meanwhile, you just have few, but these are very important systems. Here in Brazil, we have a dam system already. It was created in 2014, and we are trying to improve it. So every year, we can identify dams that should be in the system. So this is a huge challenge for us, mainly with this thing of make the assessment of the potential consequences and hazards. Some questions we have here. We make the questions individually, we just have few. So we start with one that came from Rosie. How many millimeters in average rains in the mentioned areas annually? Because we don't know which area she is mentioning, but what's the average of rain in millimeters you have? Because I know it varies a lot.
In the United States,
exactly,
overall?
Sir. Yes.
So it would range second, I'm doing some math here. At the high end, it could be 2,000 millimeters to obviously near zero in Death Valley, California, where you have very little rain. So it's extreme variation across the United States, from east to west generally, and south to north.
Perfect. Obrigado, Brian.
Thank you, Brian, for your question. Your answer, actually. There is another one from João Miguel. He would like to know if there is any event in this inventory that makes different for the control actions of this event. The control of the dam safety, if there was any occurrence that this inventory makes difference and helped the control actions, how important this inventory was in the follow-up of the US dams. I think during your presentation, you already highlighted this, you monitor it, but if you could complement your answer, please. There is another question for Becky. If new guidelines or best practice guidelines would be adopted for this database, which benchmarks you use to elaborate this national inventory of dams? What were your reference to do that?
Yes, I'm not sure I understand the question entirely. The inventory was designed in the 1970s and 80s, and then has been expanded based off more modern necessities. We've added a few data fields based on public awareness and information that has been requested. But the data model was created back in the 1970s based off our initial inspections of all dams in the United States. But I'm not sure I answered the question.
Perfect.
I can expand a little on that. With the levee database, we do have data development guidelines, and we have software development guidelines that we follow for the platform. And we're actually publishing new levee guidelines this year. They're out for public comment, and that addresses all the information that goes into the National Levee Database.
Okay, thanks, Becky and Brian. It's about the data to Hoover Dam at the NID. The system shows that the last inspection was in 2020. And the question is from David. What is the periodicity of the information at the system, and how do you oblige the entrepreneurs or the dam authority to follow the information to give the information?
The inspection data in the database represents a very large periodic comprehensive inspection that typically occurs every 5 years for high hazard potential dams. That being said, each federal agency has their own regulations and how often they inspect dams. It is up to them, the agency that regulates the dam, how often to update the inventory. So the Corps of Engineers, we make it a priority to update the inventory as much as possible. So as soon as an inspection or an assessment is completed, the inventory is updated with that information. Other agencies are keeping that information internal, and then on occasion will send that to us to update the larger inventory. So it is not our responsibility to make sure that other agencies are inspecting the dams when they're supposed to, but we do ask for that information. But the federal agencies regulate ourselves, so it is up to us to make sure that we're doing that on time and using tax dollars wisely. Not sure if that makes sense, but we're not the enforcers. We're just the information gatherers and making that information available to the public.
Okay, thank you, Becky.
After making the data available for the public, both the NID and also the national Levee database, was there any kind of reaction from the public, from the state market, in regards to the questions, the flood map, the inundation ask?
After the disponibilization to the public, the data about the inundation zones at the NID or the NLD, if you had some problem with communities or populations that was worried about the impact on como é que é mercado imobiliário em inglês mesmo?
Real estate market.
Real estate market, about indemnizations and things like this, because we are here in Brazil in the same situation, very similar.
Yeah.
Okay.
The property
Well, I would say
values
on the
inside the inundation maps, inundation areas.
Yeah. On the dam side, our districts, the Corps of Engineers is broken up into regional districts, and those districts have local meetings with people that live downstream, upstream, and around that dam. And so these inundation maps have been shown to them previously. Now it's just all open to the public and can be shared more freely. We have not heard any backlash about people now realizing that they are in a flood inundation zone and not going to be able to sell their house. We've not gotten that type of feedback. It's been very positive because not everybody has understood that they live in an inundation zone from one of our dams. Our dams are so large and the area can be so expansive. So it's really been a very positive experience up to this point. We've not gotten any negative feedback. Now, Brian may have a different story on the levee side.
Yeah, I'll take it from there, Becky. On levees, it's a much more mixed bag in terms of negative, positive. I'll start with the positive. Homeowners like to know they live in an inundation area, and so does the insurance industry and the construction industry and some other industries associated with managing the floodplain. However, a separate subset of folks are not happy about those inundation zones being in the public sphere because flood insurance in the United States is now partially, derived from some of that information. So it has a direct impact, and if they don't agree with the inundation zone that we are portraying, it has a possible negative consequence to the insurance rates, which in terms impact property values and potentially land use planning and zoning. So it has been a mixed bag on levees, much more so than dams. And main reason there is we experience frequent levee overtopping and failures versus dams are fairly infrequent in terms of major issues and major releases.
Obrigado, Brian e Becky. Uma outra pergunta aqui.
Another question. What is the process of what is the publishing process that you have at Usace in order to publish your NID, the NID?
How Usace deals with the communication to disseminate the knowledge and the systems NID and LD to the public to use the information at the systems. Becky or Brian?
I could jump, Becky, if you want.
Yeah, that'd be great. I just logged back in, so I'm now in the English channel.
Got it. Yeah. So when we launch these websites or deploy new information on the websites, we usually have a large public affairs effort associated with it. So we'll put it out on social media, newsletters, emails to interested agencies. And we generally conduct that both on the dams and levees. We've done that recently where we use a large public launch event or update event and propagate it as much as possible. And then we also attend conferences and major gatherings and do briefings on the new systems or information.
Ok. Obrigado, Brian. Acho que é a mesma sistemática para a
Thank you,
NID.
Brian. I believe that's the same system for NID. And with
Yes.
time, people gain more trust and they begin trusting the system. I don't know if Becky, do you have your audio okay? Can you hear us in English now?
I sure can hear you in English.
Okay, it's better. Thank you. Uma outra pergunta é mais aqui para
So another question now, mostly on the side of dams, but also on levees. That thing about orphan dams or orphan levees. You have mentioned the unknown ones, the ones where we don't know who owns it, the unknown owners. How do you deal with those cases in terms of identifying who's responsible for that enterprise?
Well, on the dam side, we typically only know about them if a state or federal agency is reporting them as unknown owner. And so that is one of the owner types available. So again, that's mostly for our smaller dams, not the ones that have potential loss of life.
Perfeito. Eu penso que Brian é muito parecido.
I believe Brian's situation is quite similar, right? He explained that you're still in the moment of getting information for the levees in the USA. You're still gathering information for all that, and despite it being doing it for a long time, it's still it's a developing process. That's the same issue we have in Brazil in terms of levees. And another question that I think it's good for dams and levees as well. What is the method that you're using in order to analyze risk for dams and levees?
Levees.
We've got a quick mention of levee streaming tool from the system, but I know that Usace talks about the dam streaming tool, which is also similar to the levees.
Yeah, I can start first on that. So in the Corps of Engineers, we have a formal risk assessment process for dams and levees. We have a tiered process where we do screening level risk assessments, which are fairly quick. Generally, a couple weeks of time. You look at the basics of the system in terms of performance modes and failure modes, consequences, and some modeling. And then as you work your way up, you do higher level risk assessments, which can be quantitative, semi-quantitative, and can take upwards of a year to conduct on a major project. And all those processes are very standard. However, for the screening level risk assessments, we've tried to automate that through our screening tools. And again, we had the levee screening tool. It's been around for almost 15 years, but the new dam screening tool is just coming online and probably another year out before that's really built out properly. And the higher level risk assessments are done more manual fashion, meetings and brainstorming sessions. And all the results come out in a report and are stored in databases.
And I will just add on to what Brian said. For the dams, the process that he was describing is only for the Corps of Engineers dams. They're only the 750 dams that we own and operate. Inspections and risk assessments on non-core dams are, again, done by the federal agency or the state that is responsible for those. The federal agencies are doing risk assessments. The states are not quite there yet. Some states are starting to do those higher level risk assessments, but most are are not. They're just doing visual inspections at this point. Their budgets are just not large enough to do that as a regulator, not a dam owner.
Obrigado, Beck and Brian. No
Thank
começo,
you, Beck and Brian. In the beginning, we had few questions, and now we have lots of them. I was following them in the right order, but now let's try to, if we don't have enough time, we'll send the questions later. I will try to answer all of them, but we have one here from, what is the digital model for Elevate?
com o RecRas. Digital terrain model.
Translation cut off there.
Yeah.
What is the digital terrain model that you use to the simulation of RecRas usually?
So we use multi-resolution terrain for HEC-RAS. LiDAR, 0.8 meter LiDAR is our best available, but that can be compute intensive to run. So we generally upsample to a little bit coarser resolution from that if needed. So in the United States, we have 10 meter nationwide coverage. We have 3 meter almost nationwide coverage. And our 1 meter is almost nationwide coverage now, or 0.8 to 1 meter. So we'll use the highest resolution available within a reasonable compute time. So if a compute will take 5 days, we'll back that off a little bit to a lower resolution.
Okay. Thanks. Thanks, Brian.
And one alibi, or just one aside, is we're trying to do more HEC-RAS in the cloud and not on desktop computers. And that allows you to compute more information quicker, just because the cloud's more efficient.
Okay. Thanks. Uma pergunta aqui do Bruno
Another
Macedo.
question that we have here from Bruno Macedo from ESLA, one of the regulating organs for dams here in Brazil, in Paraíba, in the state of Paraíba. He asks if data input and NID and NLD, is it done directly by the owners, or it's always by Usace and teams with the support from the regulating organs, the state regulating organs?
For the dam information, it is always the state or federal regulatory agency. If a dam owner sees incorrect information, sometimes they contact us, but we direct them to the state or the federal regulatory agency. We feel that they are the authoritative data source for dams, as they're the ones that are inspecting them or reviewing the inspection reports.
Perfect.
Roughly the same for levees, except for owners can submit information to us and we'll just review it before loading to make sure it's consistent and proper.
Eu vou até fazer uma pergunta minha pessoal como curiosidade.
I'll ask a personal question as a curiosity here. Out of curiosity, we have the national system in Brazil for dam inventory, but we do not have one that's specific for levees. In our current legislation, we have the possibility of interpreting levees as dams. We have that possibility. But would it be possible that these two systems would they could be together? They could be working either in tandem or as a single system, or is there an advantage for them being separate?
So I'll start with that one, Becky. We've always had a vision in the United States of a flood risk management system that incorporates all the flood risk management projects in a holistic view. We've never achieved that because of the various authorities and funding sources and communities. So we've stayed separate with levees and dams, and we also have a separate flood risk, like coastal projects database. but viewing them together, there's a lot of advantages there. There's no reason you couldn't do it. Obviously, they're all interrelated. Levees are always downstream of dams or upstream of dams, and they share the same hydrologic regime. So if you're able to build a flood risk management database, you know, there's a lot of efficiencies to be gained there versus separate databases.
Ok. Thank you. O colega Canali tem uma
Our
pergunta.
friend Canali, our colleague Canali, I think he has a question that would open up space for a new workshop. I think his question is about the details of the screening tool that Brian and Rebecca have mentioned here about levees. First, I think the details of a screening tool, and I think Gabriela is here, we could have the specific workshop on that. Because the one for dams is not well developed yet. The screening tools for dams hasn't been developed with, but the one for levees is well developed. So I'm not sure if Gabriela and her team from Anna could get together and arrange a workshop in order to learn more about the screening tool and see how it works. What do you think about it, Alan? You think that's a good... I think that's a great idea, Rogério, to see it together, just check the possibility of a next workshop on that. Maybe we could show our case studies that we've had with our dam screening tool for the Brazilian dams, and we compared it with the classification that was carried out previously for those dams. And then we could go into detail, but maybe you could we could get like a quick overview of what is there in terms of the screening tool right now, and then we'll arrange for a longer conversation about it. Gabriela?
Yes, we can do that. So I would feel, I think it would be better to present the LST first. Like Rogério was saying, that's a fully developed program and it's in use in the US right now. The DST is still under development and we can present portions of it, and but we wouldn't be able to provide a fully functional process for the DST just yet. But yes, we can plan that.
Obrigado, Gabriel. Bom,
Thank you, Gabriela. I think Brian and Alan we've suggested like a quick, Brian, he suggested like a quick overview of the screening system, just so we could have an idea, like a taste of it, so we could have like a full workshop later about that specific case. So if you want to give us a brief overview about it, thank you.
Brian?
Yeah, I was going to actually see, I might try to pull the system up and just show you. It might be easier.
Thanks. Obrigado.
Okay, so this is the current levee screening tool. And again, how this system operates is it's connected to the National Levee Database. So a levee system is loaded into the NLD, and when you want to start a risk assessment, you'll come into here and start one, and it'll pull information from the NLD. And so working, left to right, you work on some questions and information about your hazards. You look at your consequences, which include structure inventory. We also compute life loss and critical infrastructure within the inundation zones. And then you also look at your performance modes. This is probably where you'd spend the most time, is looking at performance modes and analyzing the annual probability of failure and the consequences associated with that. And then there's just some, computations and charting to show the results of the information, annual probability of breach and inundation. And all these results are then, stored in the database and then pushed to the NLD and various other systems that need this risk assessment information. Probably the main thing to highlight is our HEC-RAS module. We can load terrain and run HEC-RAS models in this system. to conduct that breach analysis and inform the risk assessment. Hopefully that answers basic questions.
Perfeito, Brian. Não, acho que é isso aí. Dá pelo menos.
Oh, that's great, Brian. Thank you. I think that gives us like a brief overview of what are the methods that are being used. And we could go into detail later when we can arrange a workshop for that. Some of the questions have already been answered, and some of them by some of the answers that have already been given, or maybe we'll leave them later for this event that we'll carry out later with our Usace team. And I'm giving you some of the questions that we have. Many of them have been asked already. And some of the questions are connected to the inspection of dams and levees, which is not the objective of our webinar. And I think we've had other workshops connected to that area.
Entrar nesse nível de detalhe aqui seria mais sobre o funcionamento propriamente dito do sistema.
We mostly focus on the functioning of the system themselves. Just checking out some of the questions. I don't know if these ones from the beginning have already been answered. Just answer two questions here. Miguel has asked if there were any occurrences or events regarding this dam inventory that made a difference. I've asked that question. And who updates the database for the geographic database? I don't think we've mentioned that. How do you update the database for example, the population that's at risk downstream of the levees or the dikes or the dams?
Well, for the dams, that's based off of our modeling. So that's only available for the Corps of Engineers dam. So that information is based off of when we modeled that particular scenario. That's not available for all dams in the U.S., just the 750 dams that the Corps of Engineers owns and maintains.
Mm-hmm.
So the population numbers are based off the National Structures Inventory, which we manage as the Corps of Engineers. We placed a dot throughout the country for every parcel and building, and that contains a population and cost number associated with it. So that drives our consequence calculations for both dams and levees.
Inclusive, essa informação é utilizada no screening tool, né?
And that information is used in the screening tool as well, right?
Yes, yes.
You use that type of information in the screening tool as we have shown here. And so that's why I thought that question was not. And what is the frequency? How often do you update that structure inventory, Brian?
It's updated annually. So we conduct an update every calendar year, usually at the end of the calendar year, based off of new parcel data or other information that comes in.
Mm-hmm.
Teve uma outra pergunta aqui, Alan, que foi essa questão.
I have another question here, Alan. That is something that we have identified, that we have a lot of private dams. And people ask, like, what is the main use of those things? What is the main use of those dams, those private dams?
Becky.
So for the private dams, they are regulated and inspected by our state offices. And so we do ask for the purpose of the reservoir, whether it's recreation, fish and wildlife, irrigation, stock pond for farming, your agriculture, animals. So we have about 10 different options they can tell us for the purpose of that reservoir. So that's for private dams, federal dams, state dams, for all dams in the inventory.
Mais alguma, Alan, que você queria destacar?
Any other questions, Alan? Any other questions you would like to highlight?
I will just add, for those private dams, we do actually list the owner name. So we do have the owner name and the owner type. So we have different categories, you know, private, state, local governments. But for the private dam owners, we do request the owner name. So the actual names are on the website as well.
Ok, Becky. Obrigado.
Thank you, Becky.
Mhm.
I'm looking at the last questions here. We have a few questions that go out of the scope because they're talking about escape routes and emergency situations. But maybe this is a valid question, say one that's about the breach in cascading breach for dams. If you consider some breach effects for these dams upstream, if that's a common thing here, we have dams that break in a cascading event. If you have that type of information about these connections between these
barragens do Dix, de uma em relação à outra, né? Se uma romper, a outra pode ser rompida também, né? Uma pergunta aí para Brian e Rebecca.
Yeah, I can start that, and Brian might have more information. We do have within the Corps of Engineers, we have some of our dams on the Missouri River that do have that cascading effect. So we do show the flooding from one dam going down to the next. In those narratives, that's where we are trying to explain about that effect and how the flooding or the breach or potential release of water at one of those upper dams does affect the dams below it. So we're trying to make sure that that's visible in the maps and in the narratives.
Yeah, not much else to add, Becky. You highlighted the Missouri issue, but
Yeah.
for levees, you can have cascading too. We do have interior levees to large mainline levees. So you can have a cascade effect there too, but it's less frequent than the dam scenario.
Ok. Alan, e aí, acho que tá ok, podemos...
Alan, I think questions were enough. I don't know if you have any other one that you'd like to highlight here. I think just two final questions they are also asking about. I don't know if you have already mentioned how the entrepreneur sends the information for you, how do they insert the information? But they are saying that the information is inserted and uploaded by federal agencies, right? Do you have any procedure for that? To insert the information from private dams?
So if they want to add or remove a dam, that has to be done by our administrative team. But we have certified users for each agency that are given permissions to be able to go in and update a particular dam record at any time. So, for example, the Hoover Dam, if they wanted to update information, there are 2 or 3 people within that agency that have the ability to sign in, make changes, save those, and they are automatically pushed to the public. We don't have a any type of staging area where we then approve of changes. We've given them the rights to their data, and they're able to update that information at any time by logging in. So they're vetted before they get the login.
Ok. E aí, Rogério, tem duas perguntas aqui, uma da Verena e outra
So you
do
have two other questions that asking, what is the biggest challenge you have faced while you were building this inventory for dams and levees? Because I believe it is a challenge everywhere. How did you overcome this challenge? And there is another question saying that what is the main message to organize so well a so huge database as you have? about the dams and levees from the point of view of the integrity of the data by governments and other external users. Do you have a guideline related about how do you organize this? So what is your main message about the challenges and about how to build this database in a so well done job and a huge job at the same time? How did you face these challenges? So maybe your answer could help us here in Brazil to do the same or something similar.
Right. So I will start with the dam inventory. It was already decided back in the 1970s and 80s what information should be in the database based off the inspections, the initial inspections of all of our dams in the U.S. at that time. And then so over the last 40 years, we have added data fields, but it is a challenge to get buy-in from all of the states and federal agencies. It's about 70 different agencies that we work with. So to get their buy-in and agreement on definitions and wording is a huge challenge. When we have added some data fields in the past, it has taken up to 5 years just to get the data defined and agreed upon. So that is a challenge in that regard. But at the same time, most of the agencies see the benefit of making this information available nationwide and being that authoritative data source. So they voluntarily and willingly provide information to that. So that is a positive. I think the biggest message about the national inventory dams is just that it is a tool for emergency managers and the public to understand where dams are so they can be prepared in case of emergency. It really is that pre-planning tool. But again, because the model has been around for so long and the state programs have also been around for so long, it's somewhat autopilot for the agencies to provide data. Now, Brian has a different story because he's not been on autopilot as long.
Yeah, on levees, it's much more dynamic. Our data model and our systems are more fluid. The reason is the community is a little more demanding of change. They want to see more change. So we take those inputs and we adapt quickly to those needs. So we're not afraid to remove a field, delete or add a field, change a system up based on need, so we can kind of flex to the community demands. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that the levees are so subject to flooding so much more frequently. It's just a different environment.
Perfeito. Aqui no Brasil é uma obrigação.
Perfect. Here in Brazil, it's something mandatory. We have to fill our system. The states and the owners, they have to feed our dams inventory. They have to. It's an obligation, but even with this obligation, we have facing some difficulties. So our inventory here in Brazil has around 26,000 dams, and we know from our data collection done from another states, just to give you an idea, we have some states here in Brazil. The main question is to define what a dam is. In our inventory, we have, in the beginning, we have to have all the dams, and even those that has not a potential hazard that is medium or high level, because one day maybe they can have an elevated risk level. So we have some states at Ceará state that collected data recently, and only there they have 100,000 dams in only one state. So this line, it's the challenge that we have, and it's something that I also think that 90,000 dams that we have, we still have them with a risk category, a hazard category, that are in a high level that you in the US couldn't obligate states to feed the data. This is what I wonder, and I don't know if I could explain exactly the situation and make the comparison between the US and Brazil. It's for you, Becky, the question. How do you really think that 90,000 dams in the US, it's a number that you expect, or you think that you have more dams that were not even captured and even recorded along these years?
Well, there's more dams than that meet our definition. We have a certain height and size criteria. So I know that there are some dams. There's certain states that regulate dams at a different size. So I know we are missing dams in the state of Alabama, the state of Missouri, probably the state of Georgia. But I think we do have a good sense of the dams that have that potential life loss nationwide. But as you also said, those smaller dams, if the population downstream has changed and we're not looking at those now may have that potential loss of life. So that is an issue. But yeah, I hope we have almost all of them, but you know, the number increases every time we do an update. So, so we're finding them. So.
Okay, thank you. Obrigado, Becky.
Thank you, Becky, for your answer. Alan, any other question or suggestion? It's up to you if you want to make any other question. We still have until 4 p.m., 20 minutes left. Bruno is also asking if the integrated system, if the system is integrated to other civilian defense and other departments that are responsible for that decision-making process, and if you have the control of this in the database. Two questions, about the consistency of your database, but mainly if the system is shared to civil defense. And there is another question from Rafael. How public are this information available to people? Which tool do you use to present the data with transparency when we talk about safety for the public, mainly with the civil defense departments concerning two problems that can happen with dams and the emergencies? Is the system integrated to other departments? So these were the questions.
Well, both of the databases have methods of sharing the data that can be ingested into other systems. So yes, other systems can see our data. We don't always know which ones are using our data, but we have that ability with feature services and automatic connection data connections to be able to then people can get our live updates. Brian, I don't know if you want to talk about the work with our Federal Emergency Management Agency.
Yeah, as Becky mentioned, web services and APIs are available on both systems, and that's how we propagate information. FEMA and the state emergency management civil defense groups all use our information directly off the site, and we encourage that. When we have major flood events, we typically are involved in direct support of data if there's projects at risk, and we'll do any and everything to get that information out to those groups.
Perfeito. E o Fabiano, Rogério, que pergunta nessa linha, o que é feito com as informações
In the same
obtidas?
line, someone is asking, what is done with the information that you have in the inventory? Is there any national or regional planning to use this data? Is there a planning, maybe an evacuation planning or emergency situations that use this data? And the question is for both levees and dams, or this planning is just in that city and community level that can be affected by that dam?
Yes, it is used at the local level to be able to see where the dam and levees are located. It's also used at a national level and national level exercises by our Federal Emergency Management Association and Department of Homeland Security. So it's used both nationally and locally. The Federal Emergency Management Agency administers the National Dam Safety Program. So there are several grant programs in there for funding, uses the National Inventory of Dams information to award grants to our states and other dam owners to try to help rehab projects as well.
And we also look at emergency action plans for our projects. And as part of that effort, you look at evacuation routes and evacuation route planning as part of the emergency action planning steps and processes for both dams and levees.
Ok. Alan?
Rogério, bom, aí não sei, essas outras aí, se você já olhou, se quer
I
fazer
don't know
alguma...
if you have mentioned the other questions we still have in the Q&A box. We have already mentioned the question about the private dams. So all the other ones are concerning satellite images, and Brian already said that they use different sources for the stream, and it can be better detailed in Brian's speech about the screening tool for levees. But there is a point if they use any tool to identify the bases that is not in the national inventory. It's something that was already mentioned, that there are thousands of dams that sometimes has no owner and are not in the inventory. Is there any process to identify these dams, or it is a state responsibility? Do you use any tool with a satellite image to identify the ones, Brian, is for you?
So we've conducted research in the last 5-6 years to do semi-automated remote sensing for detection of levees, and it could be used for dams too, because you're looking for that basic embankment signature on imagery or LiDAR. So we have a methodology that we've kind of developed, and we're actually going to be piloting a little bit of that in Arkansas later this summer to detect levees. We're not hunting for dams, but if we come across a few, I would just send them to Becky and say we found some dams. But yes, I mean, there's some semi-automated remote sensing procedures that can be used.
Eu penso que no caso dos diques, talvez seja até mais
So I
difícil.
think in the levees case, it's harder because you don't have this water season. For instance, levee alone, it's more difficult to identify than the dam that used to have water associated to it.
Correct. Identifying levees is very tricky, but we've been at it for a few years, and we feel we have a decent handle on it, but not in all cases.
Perfeito. Mais algum desses aí, ou Alan?
Eu acho que eles falaram um pouco sobre manter os dois sistemas separados,
I
né?
think you have already mentioned about to keep the both systems separated with advantage and disadvantage. But there is a specific question, Brian, for you. If the American government of you both think in unify both database, Levees and dams, I don't think so. It would be a hard work, but is there any intention in this sense to make both systems work together and be just one?
So full unification of the system at the technology level is not likely in the near term. But at the database integration level, to where they can talk to each other and inform each other, that's occurring now and will continue to expand in the near term. Long term, will we ever get to a single information technology system for flood risk management? It's a wish, but it'll be a steep hill to climb. As I mentioned, with authorizations and funding being kind of the main hurdles.
Essa do Bruno da ESA também foi falada sobre essa questão da
The other
divulgação.
question was already mentioned about how you publicize the questions about upstream. Becky and Brian already say something, and I think that's it. I think.
Aí a questão do nível de detalhe das
There is a
informações.
question about the level, the detailing level of the information you have, how detailed they are. Here, someone is mentioning if all the details about dams, if they are inserted, being in the dam or Levees inventory, how detailed this information is, or if the information are more superficial and general information that allows you later to search for a more detailed information.
For the dams, there is information that is not included, especially for some of our smaller dams. The state doesn't always have the information on the surface area or the drainage area, or maybe even, who owns it. So we do have blank values or values that are null in the database, and that's okay. As long as we can have their height and storage and hazard potential to make sure they qualify to meet the criteria for the federal definition of a dam. That's all we need to have in there. But that's mostly for the smaller dams. If that information is missing, I think we have a good hold on the 16,000 dams that have that potential loss of life. But some of those low hazard potential small dams that only are getting inspected every 10 to 15 years, that information may not be as reliable. But we do in the inventory make sure we say where that data comes from and when it was last updated. So you can go in and see which state provided the information in the last time that they did update that information.
Obrigado, Beck. Eu entendi que no caso dos
Thank you, Becky. So I understood in the case of Levees, the system is even more detailed. Brian has mentioned something about the pumping station and some things more detailed about the Levees system. This would be something more for the management. Is that right, Brian? Is it used for risk management? While dams use it more for the inventory to know physically that the dams are there. If you need information, you just go to the source of that information, right?
Right.
Right. Yeah. With levees, the starting point was much more detailed to support engineering processes and risk assessments. So excruciating detailed, like individual pipes that go through a levee, or relief wells or pump stations, right? The level of detail can be very high on some of our federal systems. Some of the local small systems, we don't have as much information.
Perfeito. Acho que também já respondeu esse da Mônica aí, né? Essa da Mônica, você quer fazer, Ana?
É só emendar uma pergunta final mais
And a
minha.
final question that is a question more from Alan. You have mentioned something about what is the main insight that you got to the geospatial analysis of dams and levees, mainly maybe with the dam screen tool that you have and the levee screen tool. What were the main insights you got with that using these tools, analyzing this geospatial part? And I also have another question, just to close it. It's about the levees. Usace is also responsible once the inventory was done to make any kind of intervention on them, because I believe that many levees also belong to the public and collective interest. Maybe some structures you don't have the owner well defined. Maybe other ones were built by federal or state governments. So in this matter of the inventory, Usace also has the responsibility to make inspections, for instance, or to make any kind of intervention when it's detected a hazard, a high hazard level. I'm just asking, my question is more toward for that period post-Katrina, the lesson learned, if you use it with more responsibility. So these two questions.
Maybe I could start with the last one first. In terms of intervention on levees, you're right. There's federal levees, there's state and local levees. And so the authorities associated with intervening in a flood event can vary on those. Federal levees, obviously the federal agencies will intervene immediately if there's a flood event. For a non-federal levee, there's different rules and statutes that apply. We do have non-federal levees that can enroll in a federal program for assistance, and that's a small subset of levees in the database. And then there's non-federal levees that do not have any assistance agreements. In those cases, your local emergency managers will deal with the interventions and then ask for assistance through the normal chain of command for a disaster response, which would be local, county, state, up to federal. And those requests move up the chain, and folks intervene as those requests move up and are approved. So it gets a little complicated on the non-federal side, and on the federal side, it's fairly straightforward for interventions. And the first question we might need to recap, so I make sure I get it right, or if Becky was going to.
A pergunta era sobre os principais insights.
The question was about the main insights you got during this year, doing all the geospatial analysis and all the screening tools that you have, and Levee screen tool that you have, the positive points and inputs you got, what kind of analysis it gives to you?
So the screening tools allow us to do a risk-based analysis across the portfolio of dams and levees. It allows you to apply a standard process across the systems and the projects, and then get results that you can compare and contrast and make infrastructure decisions, to address some of those issues at the project level. So without that data, portfolio management, as we call it, would be more challenging, because it gives us a data point to look at a dam or a levee across all of them. Say this one is a higher risk because of this reason, this one's a lower risk because of this reason. We need to put money and resources, over here and address those issues. So the risk assessments directly inform that process. That's a primary takeaway. There's other secondary benefits, but that's the big one.
Ok. Alan? Então vamos.
Alan, anything else? Rebecca, would you have any final message? Because we are about to close. Also, you, Brian, if you have anything else to say, your final message?
I would just encourage you to visit our websites if you haven't already. And if you have any questions, please send messages to our help desks. I'm the recipient of the NID, and Brian helps with the NLD help desk. So please go on the site and let us know if you have any questions or feedback.
Just adding on, if you need any technical assistance, or if you're working through information technology issues, be glad to help and advise and help the programs as needed.
Obrigado. Bom, então, acho que podemos ir para os encerramentos, né?
Thank you very much. So I think we can close this. Thank you for your presentation and for your availability, Rebecca and Brian, all the support we have received from Usace team on behalf of Gabriela and also Clay. And also thank you, Ana team, for bringing this team to end our workshop in this so good way. Unfortunately, we have to limit the participation to 500 people. We almost reached 300 participants. We know that many have enrolled couldn't participate today, and all this material will be available soon on YouTube, being in English or Portuguese version. And soon we will send information about a specific workshop about Levees screening tools, Brian. And once again, thank you very much. If you need the certification, please, you have the link that was on our chat. Thank you very much once again, Brian, Rebecca, Gabriela.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Até a próxima.
Thank you, everybody.